What's up, friends of YouTube? Derek Van Diest here with Zaandam Music. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the beat Trifecta. We're going to see what instruments I used, the arrangement, and the mix process. So let's dive right in. Alright, before we start, I just want to say this project took a big toll on my CPU performance. So I had to turn off all the effects, and therefore, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to be using the final MP3 version. So everything else is going to be muted. Alright, with that said, let's play the beat. Alright, and that's the beat. So next up, I'm going to show you guys all the instruments that I used. So starting with the 808 and bass sound. So for the 808, first off, let me pull up the mixer here real quick. And unfortunately, I need to turn on the effects for each one individually because of the CPU issue. So for the 808, I'll turn on the effects. And I'll show you here what I used. So I'll pull it up. I used, using Contact 5, I used the Trap Sinatra pack. I used 808 Cooking Up. It's one of my go-to 808s now. And this is what it sounds like. Okay, and that's the 808 that I used. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Okay, and up next I used a synthesized bass, and I used instance of Silent 1 with a Superstar O bass preset. It's bass number 2. And this is what it sounds like. Let me turn on the effects. Alright, and that's the bass sound. One second here. Let me show you guys the bass sounds one more time because I didn't have the bass bus channel open. So let's have all the effects on for the bass, and let's play through this is the 808 one more time with the bus channel as well. See, that makes quite a difference. Alright, now let's hear the bass sound one more time with the bus channel on. Alright, and those are the 2 bass sounds that I used. Okay, so moving up next, we're going to do all the drums. Now let me make sure to turn on the drum bus channel. Alright, let me make this a little bigger. Alright, so I used 2 kicks. I used a top kick and a bottom kick. For the top kick, I used the sample 1 instance with a sample. I used kick 20 from a sample pack. I don't remember which one. For the bottom kick, I used a denim kick from the Nick Myra sample pack on a sample 1 instance. So here is what the top kick sounds like. So unfortunately, let me play that one more time. I can't use the effects because, as you can see, there was a lot of crackling. And I don't know why, but it's been messing with my CPU, and unfortunately there's not much I can do about it. So this is what the original kick sounds like without any effects. Alright, this is what the bottom kick sounds like. Yeah, as you can tell, that crackling, I can't do anything about it though. So both of them together. Alright, I'm going to try something here. I'm going to turn off the bus channel. Maybe that's what's causing it. Let's try both of them together with the effects on. Oh, that's better. Just the top kick? Just the bottom. So yeah, something with the bus channel is taking up a lot of CPU. And let me just figure out what it is real quick. So I think it's this one here, the vintage limiter. So I'm going to turn that off. And let's move on. So after the kicks, I used a snare sound. So snare A. Snare A, I used a sample 1 instance with snare 20 from a sample pack. This is what it sounds like. And I'm going to play it with the effects on. Okay, awesome. That's the way it's supposed to sound. Alright, next up we have another snare that I used, snare B. And for this one, I also used an instance of sample 1 with a Lil Skies clap. So it's actually a clap sound. And this is what it sounds like with all the effects on. Alright, and up next we have a hi-hat sound. For this I used another instance of sample 1, and I used a hi-hat number 1 from a sample pack. And let's turn on the effects. Here's the hi-hat sound. Okay, and that was the hi-hat. So Up next, I have an open hat, and I'll turn on the effects and show you here. Open hat using sample 1 instance with the hat basic. This is from a sample pack. I don't remember which one. For the open hat, I'm going to solo it here. Let's hear what it sounds like. Okay, that was the open hi-hat. So up next we have a shaker sound. And this is what the shaker sounds like. Okay, and last we have a perk sound. Hold up a second, let me show you. For the shaker, I used a sample 1 with affinity 11, which is a sound from a sample pack. For the perk, I used another sample 1 with Lil Sky's perk 5. And let me show you what the perk sounds like. So it sounds kind of like a shaker. Alright, and that was the last drum sound. Okay, so up next we have pad and strings. So let me go ahead and turn on the bus effects channel for the pads. And let's start with the first one, which is Joy Pad. Let's turn on the effects. For the Joy Pad, I used an instance of Omnisphere through the pads and strings category. It's called Joyous Reunion. And this is what it sounds like. Let me just pull it up here so we can see it better. This is what Joyous Pad sounds like. Okay, so up next we have the Juno Pad. And let me pull it up here solo for you guys. Alright, that was the Juno Pad. Up next we have the Aura Shimmer. So let me play that here for you guys with the effects on. Okay, and last we have a choir. Oh, I'm sorry, let me go back. I didn't show you the instruments. So for the Juno Pad, I used a Spectrasonics Omnisphere. On the pad and strings, I used the Voxpad Dark Wheel O's. And that was the Juno Pad. So for the Aura Shimmer, I used Spectrasonics Omnisphere, pads and strings, Aura Shimmer. Okay, so I showed you all of that. Now let's go to the choir. For the choir, I used Spectrasonics Omnisphere, human voices category. I used a Pop Females Oz one. And this is what the choir sounds like. Okay, and those are all the pad and string sounds that I used. So up next we have piano sounds. And let me turn on the effects for the bus channel for the instruments. And alright, now starting up with the... Hold up a second, let me get the instruments here. Alright, starting off with the piano Rhodes. For the piano Rhodes, I need to turn on the effects. And I'll solo it here for you now. Okay, so for the piano Rhodes, I used a Keyscape. I used the Duo LA Piano and LA Rhodes. This is what the piano Rhodes sounds like. Yeah, and I'm sorry about that crackling sound. Alright, up next we have the Piano Celeste. And I'm also using a Keyscape for this one. And the preset is Scoring Piano Celeste from the Duo selections. Alright, let me turn on the effects for that one. And this is what it sounds like. So yeah, the CPU is also maxing out on that one, so sorry about that. Up next, let me show you here. So Celeste Rhodes. Okay, so the reason that I titled this beat Trifecta is because of this section here, the pianos. We're using a grand piano, a Rhodes, and a Celeste. So 3 pianos together creates a trifecta. Alright, so those are all the pianos. I'm going to turn off the effects there, and let's move on to the next one, which is the flute. So that's also part of the instrument bus channel. For the flute, I used an Omnisphere, and I used my favorite flute sound, which is the Enchanted Flute. And this is what it sounds like. So please try to ignore that crackling sound. I really tried my best to get rid of it. That's what the Enchanted Flute sounds like. Alright, so now let's move on to the effects. For the effects, let's turn on the bus channel. And let's turn on the riser. So I'll show you here for the riser, atonal riser. I use the Riser VST with the moving elevating atonal rise preset. This is what it sounds like. Okay, and for the next effect, I used a beat tag. It's the same one I always use. This is what it sounds like.
Zaandam music.
Sorry about that crackling again. And that's it for the effects. Alright, so those are all the instruments that I used for this beat. Alright, so next we're gonna talk about the arrangement. So before I talk about the arrangement, I need to turn off all the effects so that we don't have CPU issues again. So give me a second here to turn everything off correctly here. So double check, make sure everything is off. I just want to make sure that everything is running smoothly. Alright, it's all off. Now let's make this a little smaller. And perfect, now I can talk about the arrangement. Let's see here, overview. Let's leave it at tiny. Okay, so let's start with the arrangement. For the beginning, the intro section, I only have the analog or the synthesized bass playing with the Juno pad and the piano Rhodes and the piano Celeste. So one thing I want to point out is that for the piano sounds, I'm using the piano Rhodes and the piano Celeste only on the intro and the hook sections. And this is because I want the hook to have the most energy, so I have both or all 3 of the pianos playing together. For the piano Celeste, I have that in between the verse and the hook for the first verse and for the 4th verse. And I do this so that it transitions better into the hook. And it also changes it up a little bit here so that it's not the same throughout the 2 verses. Alright, so that's what I did with the pianos. So I started with the pianos to really introduce the vibe of this beat right from the beginning. And the way I transition from the intro to the verse is using this riser, the atonal riser, as well as the beat tag. And I also use the choir so that it's not too repetitive. I wanted to have something change up, so that's where I add the choir here. So it's a nice little addition before the verse. So I'm going to go ahead and play the transition from intro to verse. Okay, so as you notice there, the riser helped transition, and it transitions right into the drums. So all the drums come on in the verse section. So the kick comes in, snare B, which is the clap sound, and the open hat. So we have the open hat, the clap, and the kick for the beginning part of the verse. And that comes in with the 808. So the 808 and the drums are playing. And we also introduced this joy pad as well, and the aura shimmer. Another thing to note is that we took away the choir and the piano Rhodes. If I would have kept those two sounds here, it would have been too much energy for this verse section. So I had to remove it. And yeah, that's what I did there. So for the next section, the next 8 bars, I introduce a perk sound. And what else did I add here? So the perk sound, and then I also introduced this enchanted flute. So that's what changed it up here. So this enchanted flute also helps. I don't have a transition here for the hook, but all of this transitions to the hook with this cut section here on the drums. So basically I just cut this little sliver off here so that the drums just stop abruptly right before the hook. And that's my transition. So I'll show you guys here what the transition sounds like from verse to hook, and pay extra close attention to the drums. One second, let me fix this up here. Okay, so let's play it again. Another thing to note is that the hi-hats were introduced there for the hook. So the hi-hats only play on the hook and in the middle verse section here. Alright, and the hi-hat gets introduced as well as the shaker. So the shaker plays in the hook as well as the verse section here. And this verse section here. We have the pads and the shimmer playing as well in the hook. And we bring in the choir as well for the hook again, and the piano sounds. So the flute ends with this, the atonal riser as well. It ends here on the hook, so that the verse drops in energy again. So as you can tell, one thing to note, for the verse I switched back to the synthetic bass sound, synthesized. And I did this to drop the energy so that it's not the 808 playing all the way through. And I slowly start raising the energy again here. So each verse I add something new. The choir's here. You know, I keep it going. I add the hi-hat, the perk, and the enchanted flute. All the way through the verse sections, I take some things out and I add some other stuff just to switch it up. So I did another transition, the same kind of transition that I did here where the drums just break off. I did for the middle verse section here. And I also did it from this verse to hook again. And I also did it from the hook to outro. Yeah, let me show you guys now, because this verse to hook is pretty much the same as the first one. Except for, yeah, it's the same actually. The only difference is that the enchanted flute plays a little longer for the first time. Now, let me show you what the transition sounds like from the last hook to the outro, using the riser and as well as taking away the drums. Also to note, in the outro, I dropped all the drums really fast. I just took everything off so that the energy dropped a lot here. I only have the flute, the aura shimmer, and the synthesized bass. And for the second half of the outro, I play the piano one last time to play out the beat. And the aura shimmer also gives it a nice little effect for the reverb at the end. So let's hear what that sounds like. Alright, and that's how I arranged the beat. So up next, we're going to take a look at the mix process, and we're going to see exactly how I mixed the whole beat. So let's jump into the mixer, and let's start by showing you all the effects that I used. So let's turn off all these other channels. Alright, so here are the effects that I used. I have a plate reverb, and I'm using the Valhalla Vintage Verb drum plate setting. I have a hall reverb, which is the Valhalla Vintage Verb Very Nice Hall. I'm also using a room reverb, which is the Altiverb 7. And I switched it up this time. I'm using the Allaire Studio preset. Alright, up next I'm using a Pan Man. This is from Sound Toys. I'm using the 4 per side. And this Pan Man is on the choir, so that the choir goes from left to right. Now up next I have a delay sound, and this is the FabFilter Timeless 2. I'm using the chorus delay preset, and I'm using this setting on a lot of channels, and I'll get into that later. For the master channel, I'm using an Ozone 8 equalizer with a brick wall at 30 Hz and another brick wall at 18 kilohertz. And that's it. For the other stuff is just visual settings. Alright, those were the effects. Now let's go to the bus channels next. For the bass bus channel, I am using a virtual mix rack. And I just want to say that I use a Slate Digital virtual mix rack on pretty much every channel. And for all the bus channels, I'm using the virtual mix bus, and I'm using the Brit 4K setting. Alright, for the bass channel, I'm also using an Ozone 8 imager. And I took down all the bands to make all the bass sounds mono, fully mono bass. The next bus channel is the drum bus channel. And I'm using another virtual mix bus, as well as a decapitator with the Drum Fattener 1 setting. Next, I'm using a FabFilter Pro multiband compressor with a Reveal the Room drum preset. And last, I'm using the Ozone 8 Vintage Limiter. And I think this is the one that was using a lot of CPU. So the next bus channel is the instrument bus channel, and the only thing I have on this is the virtual mix bus. Alright, for the pad sounds, I am using a virtual mix bus. And for the effects bus channel, I'm using another virtual mix bus. And I was a little confused earlier because my reverb isn't showing up. And I'm supposed to have reverb here. Oh, I think I know why. Something to do with the sends here? That's really weird. I don't know why my reverb is not showing up. I must have messed up some sort of effect. But I do have reverb. It's just not appearing. So I'm sorry about that. My reverb has disappeared. I don't know how to get it back. But I'll tell you what I did put, because I do remember. For the bass, I added a tiny little bit of room reverb. For the drum channel, I added a little bit of plate reverb and a little bit of room reverb. For the instrument channel, I added a little bit of room reverb. For the pads, I added a little bit of room and a lot of hall reverb. And for the effects, I added a little bit of room reverb. Alright, these green channels are the VCA channels that only control volume. for things for these bus channels as well as the reverb. I did not use the filter bypass, or the mix bus channels for this project. Alright, let's head on to the 808 now. So let's start off with the 808. Alright, the 808, I started with a FabFilter Pro Q2. And this is what I did to it. Up next, I did a virtual mix rack with a virtual channel on the USA preset. And I also did some EQing, some light EQing. Up next, I put a decapitator with just a little bit of drive. I did this for some high-end saturation. And last, I put a compressor with a sidechain to the top and bottom kick. And I don't know why, but my sends are not appearing, so there was some sort of error that happened when I opened this project. Oh, I'm sorry, they are appearing. For some of them, they are appearing, so I will get into that later. So that was the 808. Up next, we have the synthetic bass, synthesized bass. We have a FabFilter Pro Q. This is what I did to it. Up next, we have a virtual mixed rack channel. Here it is. With the same settings, USA. And I did some EQing and as well as some compression here with the bass guitar setting. And last, I used a decapitator with a little bit of drive. And those were the 808s and the synthesized bass. For the drum sounds, we have a top kick, and I started with a FabFilter Pro Q. This is what I did to it. And I also put a virtual mix channel with these settings, and then the EQing and as well as some compression for the Kick Big 1 preset. And I also have that side chain to the 808. For the bottom part of the kick, so this is a different kick sound just using the bottom, I did a FabFilter Q to take away all the high end, because remember, I only want the bottom part of this kick. I did a virtual mix rack here with the virtual channel, some EQing and a compression with the big kick, same stuff. And another sidechain to the 808. Up next, we have a snare sound, snare A. This is FabFilter Pro Q, this is what I did. And next I put in a virtual mix rack with the channel, some EQing, and a revival. Alright, and the clap sound for snare B, I did a FabFilter Pro Q, and I added a virtual mix rack with a virtual channel, some EQing, and a revival. For the hi-hat, I did a FabFilter Pro Q, and I also did a virtual mix rack with the virtual channel, EQing, and revival. It brings out a lot of the high-end shimmer here. It's really nice for hi-hats. And I also pan this to the right. So let me get onto the panning before I forget. The hi-hat I pan to the right. The open hat I pan to the left. The shaker I pan to the left. The perk I pan to the left. And that's it. Alright, up next we have the open hat. And the open hat I used a FabFilter Pro Q. And a virtual channel with a revival as well. For the shaker, you guessed it, a FabFilter Pro Q and a virtual mix channel with a EQ and revival. Pretty much using the same stuff for all the channels. The perk channel, I have a FabFilter, and I messed up here. I forgot to do a low cut, but there should have been some sort of low cut somewhere around here. I also put a virtual channel here with a revival. And those are all the drum sounds. So let's close that up. Alright, so up next we have the pad sounds. For the Joy pad, I used a FabFilter Pro Q, and let me pull it up here shortly. Here it is. That's what I did to it. And virtual mix channel with a EQ as well as a revival. I also have the FabFilter delay that I showed you earlier routed to that. Alright, the Juno pad now. I'm using a Fab Filter low cut, another virtual channel, EQ, revival, and a delay as well, the same one. For the Aura Shimmer, I'm using a low cut, a virtual channel with EQ and revival, and I'm also using a crystallizer with the original crystals effect. I'm using the same delay here as well. For the choir sound, I'm using low cut Fab Filter, and I'm also using a virtual channel, some EQing, and a revival. And for this one, I also have the Pan Man. This is the only one using the Pan Man that I showed you earlier. Alright, that's all the pad sounds. So up next we have the piano sounds. So for the piano, before I bounced it, this is the only one, this one and the Celeste. So the pianos are the only ones that I did a lot of effects to it, and I did a lot of mixing before I bounced it. So the very first thing I did was a low cut. This is for the Rhodes. Next I put a virtual mix rack with EQ, revival, and compressor. I did not put the virtual channel on this one. This is one of the exceptions. Then I added an Ozone 8 vintage limiter. After that, hold up a second. No, I did not add the vintage limiter. That was the very last thing I did, so scratch that. Instead, I added a Blue Cat's Destructor. Let me show you here. Here it is. So I added a Blue Cat's Destructor with the 2B comp preset. So I did those three things. And then I bounced it to a WAV file. I added another bandpass here, some EQing. I did, now I did another virtual mix rack with the virtual channel this time. Some more EQ, some more revival, and some compression. And that's when I added the Ozone 8 vintage last. Here, the limiter last. And I also put some delay, the same delay for the pads. So there's a lot here I did for the pianos, as you can tell. For the piano Celeste sound, I did a Fab Filter here. This is what I did. Then I added a virtual mix rack with EQ, revival, and compression. What else? And then I did a Blue Cat's Destructor with a 2B comp, the same preset. So after I did that, I bounced it to an audio. I did another Fab Filter with the same stuff, and another virtual mix rack with the virtual channel, some more EQing, and some revival, as well as the same delay. So as you can tell, I did a lot to this project. That's why my CPU could not handle it. That's why I was struggling earlier. Alright, so for the flute sound, we have Fab Filter low cut here. I then bounced it to wave, and I did another Fab Filter low cut. I did a virtual channel, some EQing, and a revival. And last, I did an Ozone 8 maximizer, and I put it on IRC4 Modern, as well as the Modern Stereo preset. I also put the delay on the Enchanted flute as well. And yep, that's the flute. Up next, we have the effects. For the atonal riser, I added a virtual mix channel. I then bounced it to audio, and I added a Fab Filter low cut. I then added a virtual mix channel. And last, I added an Auto-Tune 8 in the key of F major, which is the key of the beat. I also adjusted the retune and humanize. I also put the delay on the beat tag. Wow, that was a lot. So, okay, those are all the effects. Now, let's see. That's everything. Alright, guys. So, thank you all for joining me on another episode. I hope you all enjoyed it and learned something today. If you want to lease this beat, you can do so through my website. And with that said, I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. So take care.